let's talk about the real money of it all, because A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf and uh, uh, Deebo were all linked together, right? Because they had the same agent, they were in the same draft class, they were second rounders, and they needed contracts. And they're some of the best receivers in the NFL. Well, A.J. Brown has signed a contract, and DK Metcalf has said, what? Basically, I'm going to sign a contract. I expect to be a Seahawk.
Yeah.
And while we don't know
Kinda,
what his.
and it feels like it's going pretty good. Like they're just all, everyone's on the same page in Seattle, it feels like.
Yep. And now we have A.J. Brown's money, the real money, right? Not $57 million in guarantees. That's his total guarantee if he gets hurt. His full guarantee is $40 million. $40 million with a signing bonus of 23.3. We can pull up his contract as well and look at it, but it sure looks like a contract that the 49ers would do with Deebo Samuel. If you're watching the YouTube, you can see it. 4 years, 100, signing bonus 23, average salary 25 with 6 zeros after it. Total guarantee 57.2, guaranteed at signing $40 million.
Yeah, I mean, for example, George Kittle a year ago got $30 million guaranteed at signing. Now, I understand that they play different positions and the market value is different, but I do think when you view valued players, right, George was valued as just a huge core piece of the 49ers team on the field, off the field, the heartbeat, the ethos of kind of what they stand for. You would say the last season of what Deebo did is just something that even George doesn't have in the bag. Because I always think about when you sign contracts, back to Belichick's thing of just the money impacts how everyone views each other in the locker room. Like part of paying Trent Williams the highest paid guy in the locker room in terms of guaranteed, beside the quarterback, which I think everyone just kind of comes to grips with quarterback money. But like all the other positions, everyone acknowledges Trent Williams, pound for pound, is the best player on the team, right? So it's like, okay, we get it. Nick Bosa is going to get paid. Trent Williams talks about Nick Bosa like, yeah, I've never seen a pass rusher like that. So it all kind of falls in. George Kittle makes a ton of money. Well, it's like he's an all-pro level talent, right? People get it. Fred Warner got paid. He's a huge part, team captain level player. So if you are going to pay guys a little more than other guys, I do think it matters that Deebo's a team captain. Deebo's beloved as a player on and off the field. And you just saw the way Armstead talked about it. I think they all value that. Because to me, when you pivot off guys, like did they pivot off A.J. Brown just because it wasn't going to pencil for a year or two? Or just maybe they thought, I don't know if this guy's like Derrick Henry fits us more than this guy does as a person. And I don't know that much about A.J. Brown, but I do wonder if that had to factor in. Because if you love the guy, I don't think you trade him. And clearly, one thing is not disputable about the 49ers, they love Deebo Samuel. I think it's fair to say that, I wonder if Mike and John, especially Mike, like, are we sure that like he's a Patriot guy?
The Titans. Yeah, I mean, it's also
Pete. I don't even think cares about that stuff, right?
DK.
I'm not saying he doesn't care, but
he loves DK, right? You can guess that, right? And I also think when you're talking about Deebo and the 49ers, you're talking about a guy that if we brought every coach and GM in and said, on a scale of 1 to 100, how much do you love? And we just started giving them their own players. Like Andy would love Patrick Mahomes at a 99.9, right?
Yes.
Whatever. He would love Travis Kelce at a 99.9. Kyle Shanahan would love George Kittle at a 99. They would love, I think it's pretty likely they love Deebo more than the Titans love A.J. Brown. The evidence is there. The only thing I would say to what you said is it doesn't necessarily mean the Titans didn't like A.J. Brown, but they might have just said for us, Deebo Samuel's carried us to the NFC Championship, just carried us to the NFC Championship game. We've been to the NFC Championship game 2 of the last 3 years. It's not as if the Titans have been quite as close to the mountaintop. They might like him, but they also might be more willing to go, okay, we're willing to do 80% of his production for a fraction of the cost. Now, part of it, too, is Ryan Tannehill's making cap hit this year $38.6 million. That's Tannehill's cap hit. Tannehill. So I do think there is a financial element to it for them, but.
Yeah, it's a lot. Jimmy's 27.
Yeah, Jimmy's is big too, which might be the reason why Deebo doesn't have a contract right now. But I don't know.
They keep denying that.
Which
I do think once you looked at AJ Brown's contract,
I agree with this.
Someone DM'd me the other day. They said, well, why do teams always backload and not front load? Well, I said part of the reason they always backload is because if you look, the majority of teams don't have $40 million just to play with, right? The reason everyone does contracts like this, the Eagles didn't have $35 million of cap space. So they could not, if you told Howie would love to have his AJ Brown's cap hit this year, $37 million, like do the majority of it up front. So they have wiggle, but they're not able to do that.
So it's 5.6 this year.
Yeah, the 49ers would love to do the same thing with Kittle and Deebo, but because of the money, like they're just not able to do that. Like, yeah, in a perfect world, you would always have the money uploaded, so you always have wiggle room year to year, but that's not the way, because everyone's on different paths, right? Like Fred and George now are on a different path than Deebo. Same with Trent. It's just not everything's synced up. It's honestly why Parags and the Howies are so valuable. Mickey Loomis, all those years, still going, because the Cowboys sometimes find themselves in a little trouble. It's just it's really hard because you're balancing so many people. Like in the NBA, let's face it, like if you got 2 or 3 max guys, it's really like, is your owner willing to pay the tax? Because the money's the money. In baseball, it's like, well, do you work for the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Giants, or you work for the A's or the Rays? In football, it's like, well, I've been using this over and over because I've never heard it articulated like this, and he was dead on. Is at the combine, Howie said that every team in the league has the same resources, the same amount of picks, the same amount of money. You just choose how to use it, right? You just, like, every team starts from scratch with a 1, a 2, a 3, but over the years you start trading. You start allocating draft picks. You start allocating money. Like everyone can spend the max the cap if they want, or use the picks however they feel necessary. You get to dictate and choose how. Like the 49ers chose to use all those picks on Trey Lance. And then those picks, the domino effect of them getting parlayed for other guys by other teams, it's just a huge, but everyone starts with 1 through 32, that pick, right? Like where did your pick go? Like, why did the Lions have pick 32? Well, because it's just, you can always trace back. Yeah. Same with money. Like the Niners chose to give George Kittle, Fred Warner, these guys money, which they should have. But now it makes everything a little more complicated. And I think from the sense of why ultimately Deebo's money is going to be, we keep talking about him sustaining. Same with AJ Brown, who's been injured. Their hits, like the impact on the team salary cap, won't be once Deebo, which I assume he'll eventually get signed, till like 24 and 25. Ideally, you'd love it. I'd pay him.
You'd want it to
all
be
the guaranteed money in the first
now
2 years
and make it basically a 2 or 3 year contract, and then you're free.
That's where you could argue you get rid of Jimmy. You could put Deebo on the salary cap this year for like $25 million. Which
maybe that's what they want to do.
Maybe it is.
Corey says, what's your opinion on when a player should be coronated? Is Deebo's coronation premature? Premature coronation. Was this not his first elite season? Just curious. Thank you, Corey. I don't have a hard and fast. I mean, I think part of it's a feeling, and sometimes you're wrong, right? Sometimes you think this player's about to take the next step. I think that's a lot of the way we talk about sports, is trying to be early on a player, not late, right? So the big debates about Steph Curry came, I was just thinking about this today, actually, as it relates to the Warriors, when Charles Barkley in 2015 said that a jump shooting team can't win the championship, and so the Warriors can't win a championship. It was one of the most valuable things that anybody has said around the NBA in the last 7 years, because Charles is such a lightning rod for takes, right? And I think Steph was such a lightning rod for takes because he looked like no one we'd seen before. And I think one of the fundamental things that really made Steph a great player to argue about is that he's not big. And players that aren't big are harder to project. Players that are big, people are more likely to say will be great, right? It takes a little more projection when you are small. And I think what Charles created was what was going to kind of happen anyway, but Charles added a lot of fuel to the fire with that comment. Was everybody had a take on whether or not that Warriors team can or can't win the championship, and whether or not Steph can or can't be the best player on a championship team. And then the chase started, and it was going, and it was going, and it was going. And it was a major story for the league. And it's part of the reason why I think still it's just so in everybody's blood that as the league has changed and LeBron's been on 3 teams and guys are all over the map, the one thing that hasn't changed is the thing that got the same reason I saw a Garth Brooks video today of him playing at LSU.
Did you see him play Baton Rouge in front of that crowd?
Amazing. I haven't, I probably listened to that song a million times between when that album came out in 1993. I could not hear that song for the next 20 years. And the second I hear that song, I'll know every word to it. And I think Steph's kind of the same way. A lot's changed around the NBA. But the second you see Steph Curry shimmying and running up and down the floor, all the takes that everybody had from 2015 and 2016, they all come storming back. And part of the reason those takes are fun is because it's fun to talk about a guy before he's won 4 championships. It's easy to talk about Brady, like, oh, he's the GOAT after he's won all his rings. But what about when he's won 1? That's when the debates are fun. Now there's not really a debate. And I think that's kind of where we are with Deebo right now, is he has shown this incredible breakthrough ability. And the question is, if he's that like every year for the next 3 years, then he is he's an MVP candidate, John. But that seems like a lot to ask of a guy. And my point is, like, this is just the moment in time, I think, with Deebo right now.
I hear what you're saying, but a huge element to this is just the timing of a player's contract in football, right? He's going into the last year of his contract. To me, if he had, let's say they had drafted him 31st, like they had traded up instead of taking him 36, right? Got at the end of the first round, picked up his 5th-year option, he'd have a little less juice, right? They'd have more. I mean, it's just he's going into the 4th year, and his crop of guys, one literally just got paid, and it was like, who's going to go first? So to me, I'm with you. The big picture, that's always the conversation internally. How's this guy going to project? How good's he going to be for a couple years? And let's face it, basketball, Steph's a good example because he was an injured guy and he could stay healthy. But for the most part in basketball, unless you have a long injury history, football, you're always scared. Even if a guy has been durable, just like, God, this game could just wipe you out, right? The moment Nick Bosa gets paid, every time next season when he just doesn't immediately get up, everyone's going to be like, get up, Nick. I'll give you my knee. I'll give you my elbow.
Honestly, I hate to say this. It happened twice the other day. When Clay gets a breakaway with a guy right on his hip, I hold my breath.
It's the number one thing that I absolutely just still gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies thinking about. And I had no decision-making power, but I was just part of a team. And I remember feeling this at Fresno State and definitely with the Eagles when a guy would just be laying there. And honestly, it could just be a random backup player, let alone a good starter. But I think that is the number one, the coronation. If he's healthy, I think it's pretty clear Deebo is going to be a dominant player with Kyle, right? I mean, he was pretty damn good as a rookie, as a 2nd-round pick. The reason 2020 got weird is he got injured, came in out of shape, and the quarterback situation. But as a rookie, there was a lot going on in that playoff run. It was like, God, this guy's pretty fucking good at the end of the season. And this year it was like, that translates. He can be a dominant player in the league for several years. The only question is health. And then you factor in, I was thinking about this because I saw back to the Bears thing. Piece of advice I'd give anyone in the NFL or, industries in radio, if you get fired, why? And I get it. We all have an ego. And really, I think sometimes we worry more, obviously, about feeding your family and stuff. But, unemployment can keep you alive for a little bit. It's more about oh, I got fired, telling people that. It's, it's tough. Yeah. It's not an easy thing to say.
Yeah.
So you're worried about other people's opinions. But why would you ever want to be somewhere? Because you think about relationships are like this. If your wife or your girlfriend or vice versa, you don't like them or they don't like you, and why would you want to be in that? In a job, if they don't want you, you want no part of it. Ultimately, AJ Brown, I get him being a little perturbed. You guys don't want me, and clearly they didn't.
Well, they wanted him for $16 million.
Yeah, but they wanted him enough to have no problem doing a pivot for Treylon Burks. The Niners, they have shown.
The video of Mike Vrabel going on a little mental health walk to the door and back tells us it wasn't that easy to go.
Yeah. I mean, it was clear it was a very tough. It's one of those very tough decision. Right. It was not an.
They just subtracted one of their best players from their team.
Yeah. So I'm making it seem a little too black and white, easy. cut off and get rid of a trade. It wasn't. No different than the Niners with Buckner. But ultimately, like, I'd say if I was DeForest Buckner, like, they were cool with trading you. So, like, you were in a place where Chris Ballard and Frank Reich, you're now the heartbeat of their team. They traded a 1 for you 4 years into your career and then paid you. Like Deebo, these guys want you. These guys are hanging up on people. I saw another one today. Not a great offer, but the Lions offered pick 32 in the 3rd round pick. Now, you could argue, well, yeah, John, these are easy deals to hang up on, which is true. But you could argue 18 and a 3rd round pick's not enough for A.J. Brown, right? When he's healthy, I text Howie, I'm like, I'm sure you watched the 49er game, but I lived it, and that was a man against boys game. That is more than the Jimmy pick in that game. I just remember, like, they could have Jason Verrett. I don't think it would fucking matter in this game. This guy is on a mission. Remember that? How dominant that guy was? And you've seen him, like, if you just watch Random Titans game, he's a great player, but you want to be where you're valued. You want to be where you're liked. Now, you also would part of pro sports and any business. It's like, okay, pay me like you like me.
Right.
So now comes the second, it's like they've pledged their allegiance, they've pledged their loyalty, and they've pledged their love. Now comes the harder part.
Yeah.
Which this isn't the other thing. It's like, it's hard because it's not Kyle and John's money, right? So it's not like it's coming out of their pockets, but they are the stewards of this franchise that mean a lot to a lot of people. It's the reason that the team has the money is because the fans, you're trying to make the best decisions to win, which ultimately benefits the fans. So you're always thinking like that. But Deebo is, a pretty fan favorite type player, right?
Yeah. I saw somebody I was just looking for it. I couldn't find it. Somebody commented on one of our other YouTubes, and I meant to grab it earlier for something else we were going to do. And they basically said, what should really offend Deebo are the offers that other people gave the 49ers. Like, some of these offers were not offers of teams that are falling over themselves for you, right? This person's point was like, the Lions offered a 1st and a 3rd or whatever it was. Like, you're supposed to be flattered by that? You should be more flattered by what the Niners say about you. Now,
what would you guess if when the Lions called and the Niners went, well, Deebo's not available, but Nick Bosa is before the draft? What would their offer have been for Nick Bosa?
Well, they used the one on Aiden.
So
right?
2.
And Nick Bosa is better than him. Now, Aiden's cheaper than him, but it's not like Aiden Hutchinson was the 2nd pick, so he's making whatever it is. He's not. Was he $40 million or whatever?
Well, he's making more than Bosa because it's a couple years later.
It's
right?
true. Yeah, I don't think would the Niners trade Nick Bosa for 2 1s?
2 and 32. No.
I know they can develop. They feel good about developing D linemen, but
I think it would cost 2 32, probably a 3rd, and next year's 1. Like, it would be that. He's a top 5 now.
He's going to be the highest paid pass rusher in the league here soon.
Yeah. But that speaks to, like, what shows you, Deebo, like, your value is unique to this team. He's not a no-brainer multiple 1 player.
It's a 2-part process. Tell him you love him over and over again, and then pay him like you love him. Akash Anavarathan said, but wouldn't you want the cap hits later because the cap gets higher and so the percentage is roughly the same?
No, because I'd want to front load it that if he's not living up to the production and he gets beat up, I can pivot. Part of, like, that to me with him specifically, right? Because my question with Deebo Samuel is sustaining this. Like, think about Zeke with the Dallas Cowboys. What was the knock on, obviously you don't sign running backs, but why don't you sign running backs? Because they fall off a cliff. Well, Deebo, can he maintain this for 3 years? I would love to keep Deebo on my team for 6. But as we see a lot of guys that aren't, like, kind of this deep, again, there's not really many Deebos, right? The outside guys can sustain. I would like to just have the wiggle room that if it's not going well, I can just move off of it. That would be my mindset. Where, like, Bosa and Trent, like, I understand doing that later. But with Deebo, I would like the ability to pivot.
I also think if it were March 15th and we were a day or 2 away from free agency, you might look at this differently, right? You'd say, well, I don't want to have no cap space. I got free agency coming up. But now free agency is in our rearview mirror, right? Honey Badger has signed somewhere else.
A lot of money.
And the Niners eventually, if they trade Jimmy or cut Jimmy Garoppolo will have cap space that they are not going to use on anything else in 2022.
That is the icing on the point, right? To me, if let's just say hypothetically, Deebo doesn't sign till training camp. The 49ers cut Jimmy Garoppolo, and they immediately have whatever, the number. Now, I know he has that. Depends on how much he signs for, but let's just use it. Let's just use his number, $27 million available. Well, who's going to become available beside that? You need your money to sign your draft picks or whatever, but the 49ers didn't have a first round pick. So what's the total compensation of their draft? It's going to be pretty low. Honestly, there are a lot of teams in the league this year where their draft cap hit is going to be really, really low relative to most years, right? Think how many teams didn't have first round picks. Think how many of those teams then ended up with like either late second round picks, or some teams didn't even have first or second round picks. So you could do a cap hit of $25 million this year on Deebo. Wouldn't that be conducive? And then it really turns out to like a 2-year contract of like 2 for $42 million or whatever, right? If you gave him 41, like a little bit more than AJ Brown or whatever.
Yeah.
And you get, boom, a large percentage of it. Because usually whenever you look at a cap, right, of a long-term contract over $50, $60 million, it's always like 3, 8, 18, 29, right? Where Deebo would be the opposite. Now, you could argue if you're him, then it's like, well, then you could just get rid of me, but you don't necessarily care if I'm paying you. Players don't get caught up on how you amortize the money over the cap. They just care how much you pay me, right, and what the APY is.
And how quickly do I get it? You could also argue if you're Deebo, you guys love me so much, you better pay me a little more than AJ, because those guys didn't know him from Adam. I mean, they watched his tape, but they don't know him.
Desperate.
Right? Yeah, if you love me so much, AJ just got 40 mil from a team from strangers.
Never met him. Well,
they talked him at the draft.
Yeah, they did.
Howie's been plotting this for 3.5 years.
He's like, John, we'll give you 18, a third. We'll throw in Ortega-Whiteside or Jalen Reagor if you want him. Ortega-Whiteside's playing tight end now. Honestly, you could probably bulk up and play tackle if you really needed him to.
He's like, let me see. Maybe I can get the Giants' 5th pick if you guys take Kadarius Toney. Hold on. If you guys take Toney, the Giants said they'll send me the 5th. You guys want to do that?